But the source material provides a perfect reality check here, and it has to do with a man named Pontius Pilate.
Yes. Pontius Pilate was the Roman prefect, or procurator, as he's sometimes called. For anyone not brushed up on their ancient Roman bureaucracy, those titles essentially just mean he was the Roman governor of the region.
Right, the guy in charge.
He was the absolute most powerful person in the province of Judea during the exact time Jesus supposedly lived. He commanded the military, he collected the taxes, he was, Rome's iron fist. Yet, for nearly 2 millennia, humanity had zero archaeological proof that he existed.
Wow.
No grave, no body, no statues, no coins.
The most powerful man in the region, completely invisible to the dirt.
Completely.
If someone were to try and prove that the specific person listening to this audio right now actually existed, say, 2,000 years in the future, it would probably be a remarkably easy task. I mean, as modern people, we leave behind this massive digital mountain of evidence.
Oh, we absolutely do. It's everywhere.
Right. Like, there are your tax records, your social media accounts, the geolocation data on your phone, and definitely that embarrassing video from high school that still lives on a server somewhere. We are just incredibly well documented.
Yeah, we leave these massive, almost indestructible footprints today. But historically speaking, human existence used to be an incredibly fragile thing.
Yeah.
A single generation passes, the memories fade, and the vast majority of people they vanish from the historical record without leaving a single solitary trace behind.
And that stark reality brings us directly to the mission of this custom-tailored deep dive. Today, we are taking a magnifying glass to a comprehensive document that tackles what has to be one of the most debated questions in human history. Like, what is the actual verifiable historical evidence for the existence of Jesus of Nazareth?
It is a massive question.
Yeah.
And to answer it properly, to really do the source material justice, we have to establish some very strict ground rules right at the top.
Right, of course.
For the duration of this deep dive, we are completely setting aside theology, religion, and faith. We are not looking at this through a spiritual lens, and we're not, making religious arguments here.
I am so glad you brought that up, because that is crucial. We are putting on our historian hats and just rolling up our sleeves. We aren't asking if he walked on water. We aren't asking if he performed miracles or fulfilled prophecies. Our sole mission is to look at the cold, hard data and ask, does the evidence point to a flesh and blood historical figure? Did a first-century Jewish peasant named Jesus actually walk the earth? Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the one thing everyone naturally wants first, which is, of course, physical archaeological proof.
I mean, it is entirely human nature to start there. We want something palpable, right? Concrete.
Yeah, we want the smoking gun.
We want to hold a bronze coin with a face stamp on it, or point to a gravestone, or under the foundation of a house. But expecting that kind of archaeological evidence for a destitute peasant living in the ancient world is, quite frankly, it's historically unreasonable.
Which feels wild when you first think about it. If someone existed, shouldn't they leave a trace? But the source material provides a perfect reality check here, and it has to do with a man named Pontius Pilate.
Yes. Pontius Pilate was the Roman prefect, or procurator, as he's sometimes called. For anyone not brushed up on their ancient Roman bureaucracy, those titles essentially just mean he was the Roman governor of the region.
Right, the guy in charge.
He was the absolute most powerful person in the province of Judea during the exact time Jesus supposedly lived. He commanded the military, he collected the taxes, he was, Rome's iron fist. Yet, for nearly 2 millennia, humanity had zero archaeological proof that he existed.
Wow.
No grave, no body, no statues, no coins.
The most powerful man in the region, completely invisible to the dirt.
Completely. It wasn't until 1961 that archaeologists digging in the ancient coastal city of Caesarea Maritima found a limestone block. It had a Latin inscription that essentially said, Pontius Pilate built this. And that one stone is the only physical proof we have of his existence.
So if the absolute ruler of the province, a man with the backing of the entire Roman Empire, left almost no physical trace of his life, the chances of finding a genuine artifact belonging to a peasant from the rural, dusty backwater of Nazareth is basically zero.
Practically speaking, the chances are non-existent. However, there is one famous artifact that constantly gets dragged into this debate.
Oh, right, the bone box.
Yes, discovered in 2002. It's an ancient bone box, which is a very typical first-century Jewish burial practice, and it's called the James Ossuary. And inscribed on the side of this limestone box in Aramaic are the words, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus.
See, when you hear that out loud, it sounds completely conclusive. Boom, case closed, we found the family burial box. But I look at that and think, isn't that incredibly circumstantial?
So?
Well, isn't that like finding a tombstone in Londis today that says, John, brother of James, son of William? Those have to be incredibly common names for that time and place.
You've hit the nail on the head, and the demographic data backs up your skepticism perfectly. Looking at census and burial records from that era, those are among the most intensely common male names in the region.
Really? How common?
About 14% of Jewish men were named some variation of Joseph, 9% were named Jesus or Yeshua, and 12% were named James or Yaakov.
Oh, wow. So they weren't exactly unique identifiers. It would be like a family tree composed entirely of Michaels and Matthews.
Precisely. The historian André Lemaire actually ran the demographic probabilities on this.
Yes.
He estimated that in first century Judea, just based on population density and name frequency, there could have been about 20 different men walking around who fit that exact family tree.
20 guys with that exact combination of names.
Exactly. A man named James, with a father named Joseph, and a brother named Jesus.
And that's assuming the box itself isn't a complete modern fabrication, which, according to our sources, is highly debated.
Very highly debated. And this is where the mechanics of historical verification get really fascinating. The limestone bone box itself genuinely dates back to the 1st century. Nobody argues that.
Okay.
But the inscription might be a modern addition. The artifact's owner was actually slapped with 44 forgery lawsuits.
44. How do you even prove something like that is forged if the box itself is genuinely ancient?
By bringing in forensic scientists, they put this box under the microscope to look at the patina.
Patina? Like on old metal?
Yeah, but on stone, it's that microscopic biological layer of ancient grime, minerals, and bacteria that naturally coats authentic artifacts over thousands of years. They found that the first half of the inscription, the James, son of Joseph part, had genuine ancient patina deep inside the carved grooves.
Oh, I see where this is going.
But the second half of the inscription, the part that specifically says brother of Jesus, was coated in a fake modern paste designed to look like patina.
Wow. So someone likely took a genuinely ancient box that already had a real inscription on it and just like carved the Jesus connection onto the end to make it priceless?
Most likely, yes.
So as a piece of undeniable historical proof, it's way too muddy to build a foundation on.
What's fascinating here is that because physical archaeological evidence is largely a dead end for a first-century peasant, historians are forced to rely on a completely different tool set, the written paper trail.
And if we're going to look at the paper trail, our sources suggest we should start with the people who had absolutely no reason to make this guy up. The outsiders. The hostile witnesses.
Right, the critics.
Because if you want to know if a highly controversial figure actually existed, you check what their enemies and critics had to say about them.
That concept is a cornerstone of historical methodology, often called the criterion of hostile attestation. And in this particular case, the ultimate hostile witnesses were the Romans. They were the ones who held the supreme power, and they were the ones who kept the administrative records.
And our sources point to a few key Roman writers. Starting around the early 2nd century, we have Pliny the Younger, who was a Roman governor in modern-day Turkey around 111 to 113 CE.
Yes.
He's writing these administrative letters back to Emperor Trajan, basically complaining about dealing with this contagious superstition called Christianity. And Pliny explicitly notes that these people hold periodic meetings where they sing hymns to Christ, almost as if to a god.
That specific phrasing is crucial to our historian's perspective, almost as if to a god. Pliny isn't saying Christ was a mythological god like Zeus or Apollo. He's noting that these bizarre followers are taking a flesh and blood founder and elevating him to a divine status.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. And shortly after Pliny, around 120 CE, we get the writings of the Roman senator and historian Tacitus.
Tacitus is writing about the Great Fire of Rome, right? Which happened in 64 CE. Emperor Nero desperately needed a scapegoat for the fire, so he blamed the Christians.
And in detailing this horrific event, Tacitus gives us an incredibly vital piece of the historical puzzle. He explicitly writes that the founder of this name, Christ, had been executed during the reign of Emperor Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate.
Wait, he gives all those specifics?
He does. And Tacitus utterly despised Christians, calling their movement a deadly superstition. He had zero motive to invent a founder for a movement he hated.
Okay, wait, let me put on my skeptic's hat here and push back. You just mentioned Tacitus is writing this in 120 CE. That is almost 90 years after Jesus supposedly died. How do historians know Tacitus actually checked the facts and isn't just, repeating whatever the local Christians of his day were gossiping about?
That is the exact question a good historian should ask. The answer lies in Tacitus's reputation and his access. Tacitus was famously meticulous, and he openly despised taking hearsay as fact.
So he wouldn't just copy street rumors.
Exactly. More importantly, as a high-ranking Roman senator, he had direct access to the Acta Senatus, the official hidden state archives of the Roman Empire. When he details the exact emperor and the exact governor who ordered the execution, historians are highly confident he is pulling from official Roman records, not street gossip.
That makes a lot of sense. So we have the governor, Pliny, and the historian Tacitus. We also have the Roman biographer Suetonius. He writes about Emperor Claudius expelling Jews from Rome because they were constantly rioting at the instigation of someone named Chrestus.
Now, Chrestus, with an E, is a very common Greco-Roman name meaning good or useful, but it sounds almost phonetically identical to Christus, the Greek word for Messiah.
Was this just an ancient typo? Because our source notes that a 4th century Christian writer named Lactantius used to get incredibly annoyed by people making this exact spelling error. He complained it was a mistake made by ignorant people who didn't understand the religion.
It almost certainly was a typo, or rather a fundamental misunderstanding by a Roman writer who had absolutely no idea about Jewish messianic theology. Suetonius likely heard about riots over Christus and assumed it was just a local rabble-rouser named Chrestus causing trouble in the streets of Rome.
So funny. Beyond the government officials, our sources also bring up the Roman satirists and philosophers. Men like Lucian of Samosata, who wrote a scathing satire in the year 165 CE, mocking Christians. He made fun of them for worshiping a crucified sophist.
To understand the weight of that insult, we need to define how the Romans viewed a sophist. In their culture, a sophist wasn't a respected philosopher. It was a sleazy con man who peddled fake, manipulative wisdom to gullible people for cash.
Just totally dripping with contempt.
Completely.
Yeah.
And then there is Celsus. Celsus was a philosopher who wrote an entire brutal treatise attacking the very foundations of Christianity. He claimed that Jesus was not born of a virgin, but was actually the illegitimate son of a Roman soldier named Panthera.
Wow, okay.
Furthermore, Celsus argued that the miracles Jesus supposedly performed weren't divine at all, but were actually cheap Egyptian sorcery that Jesus picked up while spending time as a day laborer in Egypt.
Which is such a weird, intensely specific accusation to make.
This raises an important question about human behavior. Celsus was trying to completely destroy Christianity. If Jesus was an entirely made-up, mythical figure, the absolute easiest, most devastating way for Celsus to destroy the movement would be to just say, your founder never even existed, you're following a ghost.
Right. Just point out there is no actual guy. Why bother making up a complex backstory about a Roman soldier named Panthera?
Because he couldn't deny the baseline reality. None of the Roman critics do. Instead, they go out of their way to explain away his life. They explain away his miracles as cheap sorcery. They explain away his birth as a scandalous affair.
That's fascinating.
By doing that, they inadvertently prove that even the most deeply hostile Roman critics accepted that a historical man named Jesus existed as an undeniable baseline fact.
So the Romans saw him as a nuisance, a street magician, or a criminal. But what about local historians from his own culture? The Jewish records from the time present this really unique historical headache for us.
They absolutely do, primarily because of a first-century historian named Flavius Josephus. He was a Jewish military general who fought against the Romans, eventually surrendered, and managed to become an official historian sponsored by the Roman emperors.
In 94 CE, he writes this massive multi-volume work called Jewish Antiquities. And he makes two separate references to Jesus. The shorter one is widely accepted by almost all historians, right? He just briefly mentions the unlawful stoning of a man named James, the brother of Jesus, called Christ.
It's a passing reference, very dry, very matter-of-fact. But then there's the longer reference, famously known by scholars as the Testimonium Flavianum.
And this is where it gets incredibly messy, because you read this longer passage and it says things like, he was the Messiah, and he appeared to them again alive on the third day.
Right, very glowing.
Reading that is like reading a dense, dry historical textbook, and suddenly it turns into a glowing Yelp review. A non-Christian Jewish historian wouldn't write that. If Josephus genuinely believed Jesus was the resurrected Messiah, he would have been a Christian, not a Roman-sponsored Jewish historian.
That is the exact logical problem. And that's why, for a long time, some critics pointed to this glowing passage and said, aha, the whole thing is a forgery, throw it out. But modern historians don't look at ancient texts in black and white. They look for the seams.
like checking a document to see where someone else made edits. But how do linguists actually spot a fake edit from 2,000 years ago?
Through rigorous lexical analysis, they analyze the grammatical flow. When you read the paragraph in Greek, it flows naturally, but when it hits those glowing supernatural phrases, the syntax suddenly breaks.
Yeah.
It feels shoehorned in.
So it disrupts the actual sentence structure.
Yes. Furthermore, linguists look at vocabulary. Josephus wrote massive, dense books. Scholars have mapped every single word he uses. And these glowing Christian-sounding sentences use Greek vocabulary that Josephus never, ever uses anywhere else in his entire body of work.
So it's glaringly obvious to a linguist that someone else held the pen.
Yes. Historians widely believe that later Christian scribes, who were the ones tasked with copying and preserving Josephus's text in the Middle Ages, just couldn't help themselves. They added in these glowing interpolations to make their founder look better.
That's wild.
But if you surgically strip away those overtly supernatural, poorly fitted edits, you are left with a perfectly neutral core text.
A core that matches Josephus's actual writing style perfectly.
Exactly that. A core that simply states a wise man named Jesus existed, was a teacher, won over followers, and was condemned to the cross by Pilate.
And Josephus isn't the only Jewish source we have. Our sources mention the Talmud and a document called the Toledat Yeshu.
We do need to handle those specific texts with care, because they were compiled much later, between the 3rd and 9th centuries. They are part of a later era of religious polemics, which is essentially aggressive ideological attack writing designed to discredit an opposing viewpoint.
Right.
But they're crucial to historians because they preserve much older, deeply rooted oral traditions.
And what do these attack writings actually say?
They repeat the exact same claims we saw from the Roman critic Celsus. They claim Jesus was a sorcerer who led people astray, and they repeat the claim that he was the illegitimate son of a man named Panthera.
It's the exact same pattern of hostile attestation. Defamation assumes a belief in a historical baseline. They aren't arguing he's a myth, they're arguing he was a bad person. By spending all that ink calling him a bad person, you are implicitly admitting he was a person to begin with.
That is the historian's takeaway. So we have the hostile Roman outsiders, and we have the complex Jewish historical records, both pointing firmly to a historical figure, which finally brings us to the elephant in the room, the insider documents, the Christian sources.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people is to say, you can't trust the New Testament as history, it's totally biased. And let's be clear, it is incredibly biased. Its stated goal is to promote a new religion.
Of course.
But historians don't just throw away biased sources.
If historians threw away biased sources, we would have no ancient history to study at all. Every ancient text, Roman, Greek, Egyptian, was written with a bias, a political agenda, or a wealthy patron to please.
That makes sense.
The job of a historian is not to discard them, but to read them critically, to cross-reference them against outsiders, and to look for unintentional historical truths hidden within the dense theology.
So let's look at the oldest Christian texts we have, which are the letters written by Paul, dating back to the 50 CE, just 20-something years after Jesus lived. Paul writes extensively about his travels, interacting with a man named Peter, and crucially, having meetings with Jesus' living brother, James.
This is a vital piece of anchor evidence.
But wait, let me push back on Paul. Paul openly admits in his own letters that he never actually met Jesus when he was alive. He only claims to have had a spiritual vision of him on a road. Why should a historian trust the historical account of a guy who wasn't even there?
We don't trust the vision. We trust what Paul was doing with the people who were there. Paul wasn't just writing nice, polite letters. He was actively and publicly arguing over strict religious doctrine with the original disciples in Jerusalem.
Oh, interesting.
And his chief rival in these bitter arguments was James, whom Paul identifies explicitly as the brother of the Lord.
The exact same James that the historian Josephus mentions getting stoned to death.
The very same. Think about this logically from a human behavior standpoint. It defies all reason that Paul would invent a fake founder for a religion, then invent a living, breathing brother for that fake founder, and then spend his time having real-world, highly public, bitter arguments about religious law with that fake brother in front of an audience of early followers.
That would be an insane, impossible grift to pull off. You don't hold a town hall debate over religious law with a fictional character's brother.
You certainly don't. The only logical conclusion a historian can draw is that James was a real, living person in Jerusalem, which heavily anchors Jesus as a real person who had a family.
There's also something hidden deep in the later Christian Gospels that completely blew my mind. It's this linguistic fingerprint our sources talk about. Because the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which were written decades later, were originally penned in Greek. But historians can prove they clearly share a much older, lost source.
Yes, and the way linguists discover this is nothing short of brilliant. It highlights how forensic ancient history can be.
It's like a historical detective story. So, in the Gospel of Luke, there's a scene where Jesus is criticizing religious leaders. In Greek, Luke quotes Jesus saying they focus on tithing tiny spices like mint, rue, and herbs, but they ignore the love of God.
But in the Gospel of Matthew, describing the exact same scene, Matthew writes that Jesus said they tithed dill instead of rue and ignored mercy instead of the love of God.
And if you look at the Greek words for rue and dill, or the Greek words for love and mercy, they look completely different from one another. They aren't just simple spelling errors.
But here's the trick that linguists uncovered. Jesus didn't speak Greek in his daily life. He spoke Aramaic.
Right.
And when linguists translate those vastly different Greek words back into first century Aramaic, the puzzle pieces lock together perfectly.
Wait, how so?
Because in Aramaic, the word for rue and the word for dill look practically identical on a page. The Aramaic words for love and mercy look practically identical, perhaps differing by only a single tiny brushstroke of ink.
Oh.
Imagine a Greek translator, decades later, squinting by candlelight at a worn-out Aramaic scroll, or listening to an oral tradition, and slightly misreading or mishearing that one tiny phonetic stroke. That simple human error proves, definitively, that the Greek gospel writers were working off an even older, shared Aramaic source that has since been lost to time.
It's an unbelievable catch. It's like looking at two different English translations of a website and realizing they both have the exact same weird formatting glitch. A glitch that could only happen if the original hidden source code beneath both of them was written in Python. It means the core stories date back even further than the Greek texts, right into the original Aramaic-speaking environment of Judea where he actually lived.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to pause and ask ourselves, what is our standard of historical proof? Because people often demand a level of undeniable physical proof for Jesus that they simply do not demand for anyone else in the ancient world.
Our sources lay this double standard out perfectly. Take Socrates, for example. Everyone accepts Socrates existed as a historical philosopher, but he never wrote anything down himself, and we only have 3 contemporary sources that even mention him.
Or consider the mathematician Pythagoras. We all learned the Pythagorean theorem in middle school.
Definitely.
But there are absolutely 0 contemporary sources for Pythagoras, none. And the later ancient texts we do have about his life claim that he had a golden thigh to prove he was the son of Apollo. They claim he visited the realm of the dead and that he could fly around on a magic arrow.
Magic arrow, and no one sits around saying, well, the magic arrow thing is obviously a myth, therefore Pythagoras never existed, and geometry is a lie.
Even Alexander the Great. We have ancient historical texts claiming Alexander the Great had a mermaid for a sister and that he casually visited the Garden of Eden on his conquests. We don't doubt these men existed just because ancient people attached wild myths and legends to them.
Right.
The fact that a historical biography is eventually embellished or sacralized by devoted followers does not erase the historical core of the person who started it all.
So, what does this all mean? When you take the total lack of physical evidence and weigh it against the hostile Roman records, the complex linguistic seams of the Jewish sources, and the Aramaic fingerprints hiding inside the Christian sources, where do we ultimately land?
We land at a very solid, academically rigorous consensus. The overwhelming majority of secular historians, and I mean atheist scholars, Jewish scholars, Christian scholars, Muslim scholars, across the entire spectrum, agree that beyond a reasonable doubt, a first-century Jewish peasant named Jesus existed. He was a local teacher, and he was executed by the Roman Empire under Pontius Pilate. That is the established historical baseline.
And that baseline leads us to a deeply fascinating place to end on, because if historians universally agree that this man existed and that he was executed as a criminal by the state, but we completely set aside all the supernatural claims as historical fact, it leaves us with an incredibly profound secular mystery.
A profound mystery of human influence and memory.
Exactly. I want you to think about this. How exactly does a destitute, crucified peasant from a dusty backwater province, who left behind no writings, no money, and no army, inspire a movement that eventually overtakes the entire Roman Empire and completely alters the course of human history? If it wasn't magic and it wasn't divine intervention, what is it about human storytelling, about charisma, and about belief that allows a single, completely ordinary life to echo so loudly across millennia?